Ever witnessed a neighborly dispute escalate into something truly unbelievable? Something that leaves you shaking your head, wondering, did that really just happen? Well, buckle up, because the story we're about to unravel is exactly that. It's a tale of territorial parking, escalating entitlement, and a homeowner who reached his breaking point, not once, but twice. Get ready to hear why this HOA Karen's car didn't just get towed, it vanished, twice. And trust me, the reason why is something you absolutely won't see coming. Underscore 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 underscore. Our story unfolds in the kind of meticulously planned community where everything has its place, and rules are, well, usually followed. Meet David. He's a man who takes pride in his home, his little slice of suburban peace. He works hard, maintains his property, and generally keeps to himself. His driveway? It's his domain, the paved path leading to his sanctuary. Simple, right? You'd think so. But in the seemingly tranquil world of homeowners associations, even the most straightforward things can become battlegrounds. Enter Karen. Now, we're not just using the name. In this instance, it fits the stereotype like a perfectly tailored, well, you know. Karen lived a few doors down, and she possessed that particular brand of unwavering self-assuredness, the kind that often comes with a side of entitlement. From minor landscaping grievances to the precise shade of everyone's exterior paint, Karen had an opinion, and she wasn't shy about sharing it. Most of the neighbors had learned to politely nod and move on, but David was about to find himself directly in her line of parking. It started subtly. A quick stop to chat with another neighbor, her SUV just barely encroaching on the edge of David's driveway. David, being a reasonable person, didn't make a fuss. He figured it was a one-off. But then it happened again. And again. Each time, a little more blatant, a little more comfortable. It was as if the small strip of asphalt leading to David's home was becoming her temporary parking spot of convenience. Initially, David tried the polite approach. A friendly wave, a casual mention. Hey Karen, just wanted to let you know, you're just a little bit over my driveway there. Karen's response? Often a dismissive wave, sometimes a muttered, oh, relax, it's just for a second. But those seconds turned into minutes, then sometimes even longer. David started feeling a knot of frustration tighten in his stomach. This wasn't just about parking, it felt like a disregard for his property, a subtle assertion of dominance. One particularly frustrating afternoon, David was expecting a delivery. A large appliance he'd been waiting weeks for. He looked out the window, and there it was, Karen's car, parked squarely across the foot of his driveway. He couldn't believe it. He walked out, a polite but firm tone ready on his tongue. Karen, he began. I have a delivery coming, could you please move your car? Karen emerged from her house, a look of mild annoyance on her face. Oh, is it really blocking? She asked, as if genuinely surprised, despite the obvious. Just give them a minute, I'll be right out. But a minute stretched into 10, then 15. The delivery truck driver called, frustrated. David felt his patience wearing thin. This wasn't an accident, it felt intentional. Finally, Karen sauntered out, keys in hand, a phone pressed to her ear. She moved her car with a sigh, as if she were the one being inconvenienced. No apology. No acknowledgement of the problem. That day, something shifted in David. The polite requests hadn't worked. It was clear that Karen operated on a different set of rules, one where her convenience trumped everyone else's property lines. He knew he had to do something more. He started documenting each instance, taking photos and videos. He even checked the HOA rules regarding parking obstructions. There it was, clear as day. Blocking driveways was a violation. He decided that the next time it happened, he wouldn't just ask. He'd act. David had given Karen ample opportunity to be a considerate neighbor. He'd been polite, he'd been patient. But his kindness had been met with a sense of entitlement that was frankly infuriating. The photographic evidence was mounting, a testament to Karen's repeated disregard. The HOA rules were clear. It was time for David to stop playing nice. The inevitable happened just a few days later. David was heading out for an important appointment when he saw it, Karen's familiar SUV, once again parked squarely across his driveway, this time even more brazenly than before. No quick chat with a neighbor this time, the car was simply there. David checked his watch. He was already running late. A wave of frustration washed over him, quickly followed by a surge of resolve. He wasn't going to let her blatant disregard for his property dictate his day. He pulled out his phone, not to text Karen, but to make a call. He dialed the number for a local towing company. Explaining the situation, the address, and confirming it was his property being blocked, he requested immediate service. There was a sense of grim satisfaction as he hung up. He knew this would escalate things, but he felt he had no other choice. Karen had repeatedly shown she wouldn't respect his boundaries unless there were consequences. It wasn't long before the rumble of a tow truck echoed down the street. The driver, a no-nonsense individual, assessed the situation quickly. With practiced efficiency, the hooks were in place, and Karen's SUV was lifted, inch by agonizing inch, off the asphalt. Just as the tow truck was about to pull away, Karen emerged from her house, her eyes widening in disbelief as she took in the scene. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, marching towards David, who stood calmly on his lawn. "I had your car towed, Karen," David stated, his voice level. "You were blocking my driveway. Again. I've asked you repeatedly not to do this." Karen's face contorted in fury. "You can't just do that. This is outrageous. I was only here for a minute." "It's been over 20 minutes, Karen," David countered, gesturing to his now clear driveway. "And this has happened multiple times. I followed the HOA rules." What followed was a tirade. Accusations, threats, the whole 9 yards. Karen's voice rose in pitch, drawing the attention of a few curious neighbors. David stood his ground, calmly reiterating that she had been warned, and her actions had consequences. Eventually, the tow truck drove off, Karen's SUV in tow. Karen stood there, fuming, phone already in hand, presumably calling someone, the HOA, the police, who knows. David watched her, a sense of weary relief washing over him. He hadn't wanted to do this, but Karen had left him with no other option. He knew this wouldn't be the end of it, but for now, his driveway was clear. He managed to make his appointment, albeit a little late. Later that day, David received an earful from Karen. A barrage of angry texts and a furious knock at his door. He calmly reiterated the situation, showed her the photos he had taken, and pointed to the relevant HOA rule. Karen remained unconvinced, her sense of entitlement seemingly unshaken. She vowed revenge, promising that he would regret this. David braced himself. He knew dealing with Karen often meant enduring a prolonged drama. He just hoped that the message had finally sunk in. He was wrong. You'd think that having your car towed would be a pretty significant deterrent. A costly lesson learned, a boundary clearly established. But for some, the concept of personal responsibility and respecting others' property seems elusive. And Karen, it turned out, was a prime example. Just a week after the first towing incident, David couldn't believe his eyes. There it was again. Karen's SUV. Not quite as brazenly blocking the entire driveway this time, but still undeniably over the line, making it awkward to pull in or out. David stared in disbelief. Had she really not learned anything? Was her sense of entitlement so deeply ingrained that even the financial and logistical inconvenience of a tow truck wasn't enough? A wave of weary frustration washed over him. He'd hoped that the first towing would have been the end of it, a clear message sent and received. But here they were again, Groundhog Day with a poorly parked SUV. David considered his options. He could go over and ask her to move it again, but that had proven ineffective in the past. He could call the HOA, but they often moved at a glacial pace. Or, he could do what had worked before. He picked up his phone. This time, there was a grim determination in his actions. He wasn't angry anymore, just resigned. He called the same towing company. They remembered the previous incident. David simply gave them the address again. As he waited for the tow truck, a sense of surrealism settled over him. Was this really happening again? Had Karen genuinely believed she could continue parking wherever she pleased, consequences be damned? It defied logic. Sure enough, the familiar rumble of the tow truck echoed down the street once more. This time, David even started recording the scene on his phone. He wanted to have irrefutable proof of the repeated offense. And then, Karen appeared. Her reaction this time was less outright fury and more bewildered indignation. "Are you serious? You're doing this again?" she exclaimed, hands on her hips. "Yes, Karen," David replied calmly, his phone recording. "You are blocking my driveway. Again. You were towed last week for the same thing. Clearly you haven't learned." But I was only going to be a minute," she protested, the same tired excuse. "That's what you said last time," David pointed out. "And the time before that. The rules are clear. Please respect my property." The tow truck driver went about his business, the process now feeling almost routine. Karen watched, a mixture of disbelief and simmering anger on her face. This time, some of the neighbors who had witnessed the first incident came out, a few even shaking their heads in Karen's direction. It seemed even they were starting to tire of her antics. As Karen's car was once again lifted and prepared for its journey to the impound lot, a strange silence fell over the street. It was a silence that spoke volumes. A silence that seemed to say, "Enough is enough." David watched the tow truck drive away for the second time, a sense of profound weariness settling upon him. He hadn't wanted this ongoing conflict, but Karen's refusal to respect basic neighborly courtesy had forced his hand. Twice. He could only hope that this second vanishing act would finally get the message across. But deep down, he had a nagging feeling that this saga might not be over just yet. The level of entitlement he had witnessed was truly something unbelievable. The double towing sent ripples through the usually calm waters of the HOA. The neighborhood, accustomed to polite nods and the occasional discussion about lawn care, was now buzzing with the tale of the twice-vanished vehicle. Gossip spread like wildfire. Some neighbors whispered amongst themselves, shaking their heads at Karen's audacity. Others offered David quiet nods of support, having perhaps experienced their own minor run-ins with her over the years. The general consensus seemed to be a mixture of shock and a grudging acknowledgement that Karen had, perhaps, finally gone too far. Karen, meanwhile, was not silent. Her fury echoed in online neighborhood groups and in any ear that would listen. She painted herself as the victim of an unreasonable and vindictive neighbor. She claimed she was being unfairly targeted, that her parking had been only momentary, and caused no real harm. Some, who hadn't directly witnessed the repeated driveway blockages, might have been swayed by her narrative. But those who had seen it, who knew David's patient demeanor, were less convinced. David found himself the subject of both curious glances and quiet words of encouragement. Some neighbors even shared their own stories of Karen's boundary-testing behavior. It seemed the driveway incidents were just the tip of a larger iceberg of perceived entitlement. The HOA, predictably, sent out a general reminder about parking regulations, careful not to take sides, but implicitly acknowledging that something significant had occurred. David received a terse email from Karen, filled with accusations and threats of further action. He chose not to respond, instead focusing on documenting everything. He knew that with Karen, the situation could escalate again at any moment. He started looking into his rights as a homeowner, the specific bylaws of the HOA, and even consulted briefly with a legal professional. He wanted to be prepared for whatever Karen might try next. He realized that this wasn't just about a parking spot anymore. It was about respecting boundaries and the right to enjoy his own property without constant infringement. The absence of Karen's SUV was noticeable. The street felt a little less tense. But there was an underlying feeling that this was merely the eye of the storm. Karen's personality suggested she wouldn't simply back down. The question was, what would her next move be? Would she escalate further? Would she try to retaliate in some way? Or would she, against all odds, finally learn a lesson? David found himself more vigilant, checking his security cameras more frequently, and paying closer attention to Karen's comings and goings. He hoped for peace, but he was prepared for more conflict. The unbelievable nature of the repeat parking offense had taught him that with some people, you had to be ready for anything. The whispers of the neighborhood continued, a low hum of speculation and intrigue, all centered around the homeowner who dared to tow the HOA Karen, twice. Just when David thought the parking saga might have reached a temporary lull, an unexpected twist emerged, something that shed a whole new light on Karen's seemingly inexplicable behavior. It wasn't just about entitlement, it was something else entirely. A few days after the second towing, David received a certified letter. It was from the HOA. Initially, he assumed it would be about the parking incidents, perhaps a reprimand for him taking matters into his own hands. But as he read through the contents, his eyebrows furrowed in confusion, then widened in surprise. The letter detailed a series of complaints filed by Karen, not just about the towing, but about David's property line. Apparently, Karen claimed that David's driveway itself slightly encroached upon her property. She had even hired a surveyor, and according to her findings, a small portion of David's driveway, right where her car had been repeatedly parked, was technically on her land. David was stunned. He had lived in the house for years, and the property lines had never been in question. He had the original survey from when he purchased the home, and he distinctly remembered the markers. He dug out the documents, and compared them to the HOA's letter and the alleged findings of Karen's surveyor. There was a discrepancy. According to Karen's survey, a small sliver of David's driveway, maybe a foot or two at most, did indeed cross the established property line. David re-examined his own survey. It showed a clear boundary that his driveway stayed within. This revelation, however, started to explain Karen's seemingly irrational parking. Could it be that she wasn't just being entitled? Could she have genuinely believed that the small portion of his driveway was on her property, and therefore, she had some right to park there? It didn't excuse the blatant blocking, but it offered a potential, albeit still somewhat unbelievable, explanation for her persistent behavior. Perhaps, in her mind, she wasn't just parking inconveniently, she was reclaiming her land. David decided he needed to verify this. He contacted his own surveyor, the one who had done the original survey when he bought the house. He requested a resurvey of the property lines. He wanted to know, definitively, where the boundary truly lay. The anticipation was palpable. Had Karen actually discovered a legitimate property line issue? Or was this just another tactic in her campaign against David? The thought that her persistent parking might have stemmed from a, however misguided, belief that she was on her own land added a bizarre new layer to the whole saga. The reason why her car vanished twice might not have been just about a clash of personalities or entitlement, but potentially about a disputed line in the asphalt. And the truth, David suspected, was about to be revealed. The surveyor arrived, meticulously setting up his equipment, his presence drawing curious glances from the neighbors. For hours he worked, placing markers, taking measurements, his movements precise and deliberate. David watched with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. The outcome of this survey would determine whether Karen's persistent parking stemmed from mere entitlement, or a potentially legitimate, albeit poorly executed, property line dispute. Finally, the surveyor approached David, a clipboard in hand. "All right, Mr. David's last name," he began, his tone professional. "I've completed the resurvey based on the original plat and the markers we found. The property line between your property and Ms. Karen's last name is as indicated in your original survey." David felt a wave of relief wash over him. His property line was where he thought it was. But this also meant that Karen's repeated parking on his driveway was, in fact, exactly what it appeared to be, a blatant disregard for his property. The surveyor continued, pointing to a diagram on his clipboard. There is no encroachment of your driveway onto Ms. Karen's last name, S property. In fact, he paused, looking slightly perplexed. According to our measurements, her driveway appears to slightly encroach onto your property by a few inches near the front. David's jaw dropped. This was an unexpected twist indeed. Not only was he not encroaching on Karen's land, but the reverse seemed to be true. This added a whole new layer of irony to the situation. Karen, in her self-assuredness, had been completely wrong. With the surveyor's findings in hand, David knew he had to address Karen. He contacted the HOA, providing them with the surveyor's report. The HOA board, which had been somewhat passive up to this point, seemed to take this new information more seriously. They scheduled a meeting between David and Karen, with a board member present to mediate. The meeting was tense. Karen, armed with her own surveyor's report, remained defiant. "His driveway is on my land. That's why I was parking there," she insisted, her voice raised. David calmly presented the findings of his surveyor. "According to a professional resurvey, Karen, your assertion is incorrect. In fact, your driveway slightly encroaches on my property." Karen scoffed. "Their surveyor is wrong. Mine is accurate." This is where the HOA board member, a level-headed woman named Ms. Henderson, stepped in. "Ms. Karen's last name, we have two conflicting surveys. To resolve this definitively, the HOA will commission a third, independent survey. We will abide by the findings of that survey." Karen reluctantly agreed, though her body language conveyed her continued disbelief. The waiting period for the third survey felt like an eternity. David tried to go about his life, but the underlying tension with his neighbor remained. Finally, the results of the independent survey came in. Ms. Henderson called both David and Karen to the HOA office. The findings? They corroborated David's original survey and the resurvey he had commissioned. David's driveway was entirely within his property lines. Furthermore, it confirmed that a small portion of Karen's driveway did indeed encroach upon David's land. The look on Karen's face was priceless. The unwavering self-assurance finally cracked, replaced by a mixture of shock and embarrassment. Ms. Henderson addressed Karen sternly, reminding her of the HOA's parking regulations and the importance of respecting property lines. She also suggested that Karen might want to consider having her own driveway adjusted to avoid further issues. And so, the unbelievable reason why Karen's car vanished twice wasn't just about her entitlement to park wherever she pleased. It was rooted in her completely incorrect belief that David's driveway was partially on her property. This misguided conviction fueled her repeated parking offenses, leading to the double towing. In the aftermath, things did change, albeit gradually. Karen, perhaps humbled by being proven so definitively wrong, stopped parking in David's driveway. There was still a coolness between them, but the blatant disregard for property lines ceased. Some neighbors, who had privately rolled their eyes at Karen's past behavior, now had a new story to whisper about. The HOA Karen who was so sure of her property lines that she was actually the one slightly over the line. David, though relieved the parking issue was resolved, couldn't help but shake his head at the absurdity of it all. The drama, the conflict, the two towings, all stemming from a completely inaccurate perception. It truly was unbelievable. And there you have it. The tale of the HOA Karen whose car vanished twice, and the unbelievable reason why. It wasn't just about entitlement. It was about a fundamental misunderstanding of where the property lines actually lay. A reminder that sometimes, the most dramatic conflicts arise from the most unexpected and incorrect assumptions. What do you think of this unbelievable turn of events? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more unbelievable stories from the neighborhood.